Welcome, traveler. Tonight, we step softly through the folds of silk and the shadows of ancient incense into a world long faded, yet strangely familiar in its silence. Our journey will take us to 8th century China, the Tang Dynasty, a time of unmatched elegance, power, beauty, and contradiction, and a civil war that cost more lives than can be counted. In this story, we begin not with emperors or battles, but with the quiet struggle of a monk rising before dawn, kneeling on cold stone, carving discipline into body and mind, and where exams decided the future of nations. A life of spiritual aspiration and constant discomfort. From there, we move into the chaos of rebellion, a court seduced, a general betrayed. Then we travel deep into the desert, to a sealed cave where forgotten scrolls once whispered of lives long hidden, of mothers, merchants, and monks whose thoughts have waited 1,000 years to be read again. Finally, we return to the moonlit pavilions of the scholar elite, where poetry was a weapon, where tea was poured as performance. So, breathe deep. Let the scent of ancient ink and camphor fill your thoughts, and allow the rhythm of history to lull you gently as we begin with the quiet austerity of monastic life. In the Tang Dynasty, imagine yourself waking in total darkness, no soft bed, no silence, just the distant clang of a brass bell echoing through stone halls, calling you not with urgency but with inevitability. Trade extended across vast networks, and Buddhism, imported centuries earlier, had become deeply embedded in spiritual and political life. It is 4 a.m. Your mat is rolled, your robe is donned, plain, coarse, often still damp from the wash. The stone beneath your feet is cold, and the air in the meditation hall is even colder. No one looks at you, no one moves. The only sound is the faint clicking of rosary beads and the occasional creak of wooden beams overhead. The first hour of the monastic day. The Tang Dynasty, reigning from 618 to 907 CE, was one of the most culturally rich periods in Chinese history. Literature, art, and religion flourished. Monasteries were everywhere, some small and rural, others massive and state-sponsored. Some focused on quiet contemplation, others more on ritual, scholarship, or public service. But most shared one thing in common, routine, and it was not gentle. You rise quickly. There is no time to stretch or reflect. You are not alone. The hall is silent, filled with rows of figures sitting cross-legged. You sit, your spine straight, hands folded, eyes half-lidded, and for the next hour or two, depending on the monastery, you do nothing but breathe. The repetition is what matters, the ritual, the sound of centuries echoing through your throat, and think, and not think. The body, unused to stillness, begins to ache, knees tighten, back tenses. The cold seeps in, but shifting is discouraged, fidgeting is disrespectful. Even in darkness, someone is always watching. You may feel tired or hungry or disoriented, but you say nothing. After meditation, there is chanting, tea if the monastery is well supplied. You eat in silence with the others, facing forward. There is no conversation, no second helpings. In the great hall, voices rise, low, rhythmic, ancient. Sutras, committed to memory, spoken as song. You may not fully understand the text. Few did. Somewhere in the background, incense burns. The scent is thick. Not sweet, but herbal, pungent, almost medicinal. It is both grounding and distracting. Breakfast follows, but this is not a feast. Rarely is there violence. But the silence of disapproval carries its own weight. A bowl of rice, perhaps some pickled vegetables. Every movement is deliberate, every spoonful precise. You clean your bowl with the last grain of rice, wash it yourself. Return it to its place. Insects are frequent companions, lice in bedding, ants in rice, mosquitoes in summer, and then the day begins. Labor is essential. You may be assigned to the gardens, digging, planting, hauling buckets from a nearby stream. You may copy text, long hours hunched over rough paper with a bamboo brush. You may sweep halls, scrub floors, or boil water. Everything is done slowly, with presence, or at least with control, and always. With observation, obedience is not suggested. It is the air you breathe. Discipline is enforced gently, but absolutely. A missed bell, a sloppy chant, a moment of distraction during meditation, these may earn you extra chores or less food. You may be corrected by an elder monk with a glance or a single word. That word stays with you. Illness is not uncommon. The diet is meager. The clothing thin. You do not complain. Complaints are desires given voice, and desire is the enemy. Pain is a tool. Cold is a reminder. Hunger is a teacher. So you endure, because endurance is sacred. At night, you return to meditation. Perhaps an hour, perhaps more. You chant again. The same words, the same tones, the same slow movements. And finally, after evening tea, you retire to your mat, a thin roll of straw placed directly on the floor. You sleep in your robe. You do not dream. Or if you do, you do not speak of it. And so the days pass, each one indistinguishable from the last. Time measured not by moments, but by bells, food, chants, ink, ashes. The rhythm of monastic life is relentless. But for those who stay, for those who surrender fully, it is also liberating. To have no self is to have no burden. To have no choice is to have no regret. To have no ambition is to have peace. And yet, most who came here did not last, not for a year, not for a season, often not even for a month. The silence was too loud, the hunger too constant, the self too persistent. You would leave, most did, but the monastery remains. Its walls thick with incense, its scrolls dark with oil, its bells still ringing before dawn. And somewhere a young monk wakes to the sound of discipline and rises to begin again. Now let us leave the quiet halls of devotion and step into a very different kind of chaos, a court seduced by beauty, a general overcome by ambition, and a rebellion that would shake an empire. Imagine the year is 744 CE. The Tang Empire is at its height, vast, wealthy, brilliant. Silks from the south, horses from the west, gold, ink, and incense flowing through the veins of a nation stretching across deserts, mountains, and rivers. In the north, soldiers patrol borders. In the capital, poets drink wine beneath plum blossoms. And in the palace, the emperor watches her dance. Her name is Yang Yuhuan. You may know her as Yan Gaifei, imperial consort, and one of the legendary four beauties of China. She was not the empress, but in every way that mattered. She was the empire's beating heart. Yang was not born into royalty. Her rise was as elegant as it was controversial. Originally married to the emperor's son, she later caught the eye of the emperor himself, Xuanzong. Their connection was undeniable. Political taboos were sidestepped, formalities rearranged. She became his favorite, not merely for her beauty, though that was praised endlessly in poems and portraits, but for her wit, her presence, and her ability to make an aging emperor feel alive again. And so the empire shifted quietly around her. As her influence grew, so did that of her family. Her cousin, Yang Gozhang, was elevated to high office. Her relatives filled court appointments. Ministers whispered, frowned, bowed, but few dared object. She brought joy to the emperor, and that was enough. But there was another figure rising in the court's shadows, one whose charm was matched only by his ambition. His name was Enlishan, and Lishan was a frontier general of mixed Sogdian and Turkic origin. Charismatic, theatrical, and clever, He had a flair for performance, often making the emperor laugh with his antics, once even dressing as a fat baby for a palace skit. He was no fool, and Lashon knew how to play the game. He flattered Yang Gaifei, calling her mother in jest. She laughed. The emperor approved, and Lushan, despite his growing power, remained welcome in court, but his power was not theatrical. It was military. He commanded troops, controlled provinces, and slowly, quietly, he became a threat too large to ignore. By 755 CE, tensions boiled. Yang's cousin, now chancellor, viewed Lushan with suspicion. Rumors swirled. Factions formed. Letters were intercepted. Trust unraveled. And then it happened, and Lushan rebelled. The rebellion was swift, brutal, and devastating. He marched on the capital, declaring a new dynasty. The Yan cities fell. Armies crumbled. Refugees streamed through mountain passes. The imperial court fled, abandoning palaces, scrolls, and porcelain. And in the chaos, the emperor made a choice. Or rather, was forced to. In the summer heat, surrounded by soldiers resentful of failure and fear, Emperor Xuanzang was given a demand. Yan Gaifei must die. They blamed her for the corruption of court, for the distraction of the emperor, for the rebellion itself. Whether fair or not mattered little. And so, on the road to exile, beneath the weight of history and heartbreak, she was strangled by royal guards. Her body was buried hastily by the roadside. The empire wept, and the emperor would never be the same. The rebellion raged for nearly 8 years. It caused one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. Estimates vary wildly, but millions died. The Tang Dynasty never fully recovered. Though it would continue for over a century, the golden age was over. The confidence, the brilliance, the unified shimmer of a vast, powerful state faded like incense smoke in a draft. And in Lushan, he did not live to see the end. He grew paranoid, ill, possibly blind, suspicious of his own son. He was eventually assassinated by that same son in Qingqiu. Ambition devours itself in time, but the story lingers. Of a dancer who made the emperor smile, of a general who saw an empire as a stage, of a court that lost its center, and a nation that fractured. As we step back from battlefields and broken hearts, let us follow the wind across the western deserts. There, where the sands shift and caves sleep beneath cliffs, we'll uncover something older, something hidden, something waiting. Picture a dry landscape, not barren, but hushed. The Mogao Caves, also known as the Caves of the Thousand, Buddhists lie outside the city of Dunhuang along the old Silk Road, a place where monks once waited for travelers and travelers once waited for sandstorms to pass. It is a place of refuge and of memory. The caves were not formed by nature, but carved, deliberately, patiently, beginning in the 4th century CE and continuing for hundreds of years. Monks, artisans, and patrons worked together to shape shrines, grottos, and temples into the cliffs. Some were small, just enough space for a kneeling monk and a candle. Others, vast, painted from floor to ceiling with Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and swirling celestial patterns. In total, more than 700 caves were created, each one a devotion. Inside, the air is still dry, cool, ideal for preservation. Paintings glow with lapis blues, cinnabar reds, and gold leaf. Silk banners flutter softly in the shadows. Scriptures sit quietly, rolled or folded, sealed away from time. Among these, the most famous was hidden. In the early 11th century, a monk named Wang Honglu, acting as caretaker of the caves, discovered a sealed chamber, Cave 17. Behind a thin wall of plaster and paint, he found an antechamber filled not with statues or murals, but with scrolls. Tens of thousands of them. The scrolls had been placed there, it is believed, to protect them, not from raiders, but from decay, war, or perhaps disuse. Some were religious texts. Others were mundane, land deeds, tax records, children's homework, letters, inventories. A library of forgotten lives. The writings span languages: Chinese, Tibetan, Sanskrit, Uyghur, and others, reflecting the rich diversity of people who once passed through Dunhuang. And among them, one scroll stood out, the Diamond Sutra, dating to 868 CE. It is the oldest known printed book in the world with a confirmed date. Not copied by hand, but printed with woodblocks, page by page. Its delicate paper and intricate illustrations survived the centuries almost miraculously. Its message? The impermanence of form, the illusory nature of self, the idea that reality is fleeting. Ironically, the scroll itself endured while empires collapsed. But for centuries, Cave 17 and its contents remained hidden, until the early 20th century, when foreign explorers, scholars, and treasure hunters arrived. One of them, R.L. Stein, a British-Hungarian archaeologist, visited Dunhuang in 1907. He befriended Wang Yuanlu, purchased hundreds of scrolls for a modest sum, and shipped them to London. Other expeditions followed from France, Russia, Japan, and eventually China itself. Some saw it as preservation, others plunder. The truth, perhaps, lies in both. Today, the scrolls of Dunhuang are scattered in Beijing, Paris, St. Petersburg, and London. Researchers have spent decades cataloging, translating, and digitizing them. Some have been virtually reunited. Others remain unread. Their contents range from profound to practical: sermons and prayers, astrological charts, medical recipes, merchant contracts, folk songs. Together, they reveal something rare in history, not the voice of emperors, but the murmur of ordinary life. Imagine a child's handwriting crooked on aged paper, a mother's note tucked into a basket, a monk's revision correcting earlier verse. These are the echoes found in the caves of Dunhuang. They are not loud, not grand, but they endure. The desert protected them, the cave walls embraced them, and now, centuries later, we read them and remember. From the silence of hidden sutras, we now return to the surface, to lanterns glowing in gardens, to pavilions filled with laughter and quiet rivalry. Next, we step into a world of brushstrokes and porcelain teacups, of poetry recited under moonlight, and exams that shape the future of a nation. Imagine a quiet courtyard. The lanterns have just been lit. A breeze carries the scent of osmanthus and paper ash. You sit beneath a plum tree, holding a brush. And beside you, a rival recites a poem about the moon. That may also be about your career. In the Tang Dynasty, power came in many forms, through armies, land, marriage, and words. At the heart of China's bureaucracy was an idea both elegant and cruel: the civil service examination system, a ladder of opportunity made entirely of calligraphy, classical texts, and memory. To rise through the ranks of government, one needed not wealth, but talent, at least in theory. And talent in the Tang court meant something very specific: the ability to write. From the time you were a child, if your family had aspirations, or even just hope, you would begin preparing. Lessons in Confucian classics, endless recitation of commentaries, brushwork drills until your fingers cramped. Poetry, not just memorized, but mastered, rhetorical style, literary finesse, irony, structure, even handwriting was judged. A crooked stroke could stall a career before it began. The civil service exams were grueling. They could last days, with candidates locked into small rooms, isolated from all distraction, monitored closely to prevent cheating. The prompts were philosophical or moral questions rooted in Confucian values, requiring perfectly structured essays and poetic responses. To pass was rare, to excel, almost miraculous. A single pass could elevate your family's name for generations. A failure might send you home with nothing but shame. Some tried again and again and again. There are records of men taking the exam more than 10 times, some into their 60s. But passing the exam was only the beginning. Once admitted to the bureaucracy, you entered the world of the literati, the scholar officials. Their lives were complex. On one hand, administrators, tax collectors, magistrates, imperial advisors. On the other, poets, philosophers, calligraphers, tea connoisseurs. Their days were filled with paperwork, but also with performance. To be a respected scholar was not just about policy, it was about aesthetic refinement, the ability to recite ancient verse at a gathering, to compose a couplet on demand, to host a tea ceremony that felt like a whispered painting. Status depended as much on your intellect as your taste. Tea was more than a beverage. It was philosophy in liquid form, prepared with intention, appreciated with silence. Guests would examine the quality of the water, the aroma of the leaves, the color in porcelain cups. Conversations would drift from politics to art, from metaphysics to gossip, but always in carefully curated tones. To speak too boldly was vulgar, to be too reserved, suspicious. The trick was balance. In the evenings, gatherings were common, informal salons and gardens or candlelit rooms. Here, the true games began. One scholar might drop a subtle poem, laced with historical metaphor, hinting at a rival's recent failure. Another might respond with an impromptu verse that seemed self-deprecating, but subtly mocked the first. It was not cruelty, at least not openly. It was graceful warfare. Beneath the elegance of the literati world lay a constant tension. Promotion depended on the emperor's favor and the judgment of peers. One misstep, a poorly phrased letter, an unpopular policy, a single failed exam by a son, could unravel everything. And so, much like in the monastery or the palace, every movement was deliberate. Every word carried weight. Many of the Tang Dynasty's greatest poets were scholar officials. Li Bai, known for his romantic, free-spirited verse, was also a court poet, albeit briefly. He once wrote a poem so beautiful, it was said the emperor ordered it written in gold ink. Du Fu, more somber and socially conscious, struggled with poverty and bureaucracy, but his poetry later became foundational, a model of virtue, restraint, and sorrow. These men lived within the system, and yet often stood outside it, observing, critiquing, yearning. Their words survived not because they ruled, but because they noticed. And so, in a quiet courtyard, beneath moonlight filtered through lattice, the scholar writes. The brush glides, ink pools, a thought becomes formed. Somewhere beyond the city walls, armies may move, rebellions may stir, scrolls may be buried, but here, there is only the poem, the cup, the line that must be just right. To be a scholar in the dynasty was to live at the edge of tension between freedom and duty, between artistry and survival. It was to find meaning in ink, power in metaphor, and rest in the careful turning of a page. As the tea cools and the brush is cleaned, we now come to the end of our journey. But before we part, allow me to offer a few final words, a soft landing to bring you into the present and perhaps to sleep. And so we reach the end. But history, of course, never really ends. It waits, patiently, folded into scrolls, stitched into robes, buried beneath stone, or whispered between lines of poetry. Tonight, we've walked quietly through the Tang Dynasty, not as rulers or rebels, but as silent observers, as wanderers moving through the still spaces left behind by time. We sat on cold stone floors beside monks who lived entire lifetimes in silence. We watched a single dancer undo an empire. We uncovered forgotten thoughts in caves sealed for 1,000 years. and we sip tea in moonlight with men who shaped nations using nothing but ink and metaphor. The Tang Dynasty was dazzling, but not always kind. Its cities were radiant, but full of secrets. Its people were brilliant, but often bound. Its greatness came with contradictions, and its collapse came quietly, then suddenly, like a poem ending mid-verse. And that is the rhythm of all history, not a straight line, but a tide. Rising, folding, vanishing, only to return again in strange, familiar forms. So perhaps tonight, what we've truly explored is not just the Tang Dynasty, but the lives within it. The lives no one writes poems about. The junior monk who couldn't stay awake during chanting. The girl who spent her childhood watching her brothers study for exams she could never take. The calligrapher whose hands shook after too many years bent over scrolls. The old soldier who once followed in Lushan and now sells salt in silence. Lives not made for legend, but no less real. No less like ours. And maybe that's why these stories stay with us. Not because they are grand, but because they are familiar in ways we don't always expect. The search for meaning, the burden of duty, the longing to be seen, the comfort of rhythm even in hardship, the need to write something down just so it won't be forgotten. Now, as the brush is cleaned and the lanterns fade, as the scrolls are rolled and the bells of the monastery echo far into the hills, we return to stillness. To now, to the quiet of your own room, to the steady breathing of sleep just beyond your reach, to the soft, ancient truth that history is not behind us. It's within us, always waiting, always whispering. Thank you for listening, for drifting through this forgotten world with me, and for allowing the rhythm of the past to guide you through this evening. If you are still awake, I hope your thoughts are quieter now. If you have already drifted off, all the better. Until next time, sleep well, and may the past keep you company. Good night.